Jaya Gauranitai, 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 Jaya Gauranitai. Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada. Jaya Jaya Gurudev, 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 Jaya Jaya Gurudev. Jam Vishnupad Paramhamsa Parivrajakacarya Ashtotar Hata Shri Srimati's Divine Grace Abhay Charanaravind Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Shri Shri Radha Gopinath Bhagwan Ki Jai Shri Jagannath Baladev Subhadra Maharani Ki Jai Shri Shri Gauranitai Ki Jai Samaveda Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai Jai Nittai Gaura Pramanande, Hari Hari Bol, all glories to the assembled devotees, Hare Krishna, all glories to the assembled devotees, Hare Krishna, all glories to the assembled devotees, Hare Krishna, all glories to Shri Shri Guru and Gauranga, all glories to Srila Prabhupada, Jagat Guru, Srila Prabhupada, Ki Jai. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayam Udirayet Nashtaprayesha Bhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Uttama Shloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtiki Krishnaya Vasudevaya Devaki Nandanaya Cha Nandagopakumaraya Govindaya Namo Namaha. Reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 2, Chapter 10, Text 18. Chapter title, Bhagavatam is the answer to all questions. Mukatastalu nirbhinnam Mukatastalu nirbhinnam Jiva tatropajayate Jiva tatropajayate Tato nana raso jajne Tato nana raso jajne Jivaya yo digamyate Jivaya yo digamyate Mukatastalu nirbhinnam Jiva tatropajayate Tato nana raso jajne Jivaya yo digamyate Mukatastalu nirbhinnam Jiva tatropajayate Tato nana raso jajne Jivaya yo digamyate. Jiva tatropajayate tato jnana raso jajne jivayadi gamyate mukatastalu nirbinham jiva tatro pajayate tato nana raso jajne jivaya yodigamyate mukatastalu nirbinham jiva tatro pajayate tato nana raso jajne jivayadi gamyate. Go to a translation, please repeat. Mukataha, from the mouth. Talu, the palate. Nirbinam, being generated. Jiva, the tongue. Tatra, thereupon. Upajayate, becomes manifested. Tataha, thereupon. Nana rasaha, various tastes. Jajne, became manifested. Jivaya, by the tongue. Yaha, which. Adigamyate, become relished. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace Abhay Charanarvinda Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Jagadguru Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Translation. From the mouth the palate became manifested, and thereupon the tongue was also generated. After this all the different tastes came into existence so that the tongue can release them. Purport. This gradual process of evolution suggests the explanation of the controlling deities Adi Daiva, because Varuna is the controlling deity for all relishable juices. Therefore, the mouth becomes the resting place for the tongue, which tastes all the different juices, of which the controlling deity is Varuna. This suggests, therefore, that Varuna was also generated along with the development of the tongue. The tongue and the palate being instrumental or adibhutam or forms of matter, but the functional deity who is a living entity is Adidaiva, whereas the person undergoing the function is Adhyatma. Thus the three categories are also explained as to their birth after the opening of the mouth of the Virat Purusha. The four principles mentioned in this verse serve to explain the three main principles, namely Adhyatma, Adidaiva and Adibhutam, as explained before. Om Jnanatimirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kada Mayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakanvitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shiva Shadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Kam karoti vachalam pangum langayate garim hit kripatamaham vande Shri Gurun Dinatarinam Paramananda Madhavam Shri Chaitanya Ishwaran. Hare Krishna. I'll read the translation again. From the mouth, the palate became manifested, and thereupon the tongue was also generated. After this, all the different tastes came into existence, so that the tongue can relish them. Chapter title, Bhagavatam is the answer to all questions. Hare Krishna. It is said that the best thing to offer to Mother Ganga is the water of Mother Ganga herself. So similarly, the glories of Srimad Bhagavatam is best described by Srimad Bhagavatam itself. No one else can. Just like we see in Bhagavad Gita, Krishna himself explains about his glories. Because except Krishna, no one else potentially can do it fully. And Krishna also says, after attempting to extol his glories, he tells to Arjuna, Atava bahunetena kim jnatena tavarjuna vistabhyaham itam Krishnam ekamshena stito jagat. What is the need of all this detailed knowledge? With a single fragment of mine, I sustain this entire, pervade and sustain this entire creation, he says. So here, before we delve deep into Srimad Bhagavatam, Bhagavatam itself is telling us, wake up. By the way, I am the answer to all the questions. Materially speaking, if somebody actually says that, we would call that as like the pinnacle of egotism. But Srimad Bhagavatam, true to its transcendental nature, true to its spiritual nature, it has to actually speak for itself, because no one else can go to the bottom of it to fully extol its glories. So this chapter started with this chapter started with the famous verse, Atra sarga visargascha sthanam poshanam hitayaha manvantara ishanukata nirodha muktir ashrayaha. After describing the 10 topics, Shukadeva Goswami goes on to explain about the definition of each one of those 10. If you remember, that's how the flow of this chapter goes. Atra sarga. Sarga is creation by Supreme Lord. Originally the first avatar or the first Purusha. Srila Prabhupada explains that Supreme Lord is there, who is Ishvara Parama Krishna. Krishna is the original Supreme Personality of Godhead. And the one who got created as the first being, spiritual being, so to speak, is Balaram. Krishna created him, or rather expanded him from his right arm. Srimati Radharani from his left, it's given. So from Balaram comes the first Chaturvyuha. Vasudev, Sankarshana, Pradyumna and Aniruddha. So these four. First quadruples it's mentioned. Vasudev, Sankarshana, Pradyumna and Aniruddha. From that Sankarshana comes Narayana. And Prabhupada explains from that Narayana comes the secondary or second quadruples. Again, Vasudev, Sankarshan, Pradyumna and Aniruddha. This Sankarshan is called Mahasankarshan, and from him onwards we will see Mahavishnu, Garbhodakshay Vishnu, Kshirodakshay Vishnu, and the whole avatars is actually given in this chapter. So, the original creation that happened when Mahavishnu, in his Yoga Nidra position, he then started to expand unlimited universes. Srila Prabhupada explains, our universe is the smallest of all the universes. We come across this pastime where Lord Brahma, our Brahma is the smallest because he has the least number of heads. Prabhupada says similarly, the universe that we actually live in is also the smallest. So depending on the size of the universe, the number of heads also of Brahma will proportionately increase. So the bigger the size of the universe, more the number of heads of Lord Brahma. We see in Chaitanya Charitamrita. Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu himself explains that. So here, after creating, he then gives secondary creation to Lord Brahma. That task is actually entrusted to Lord Brahma, and then Brahma creates. We see that description in Bhagavatam. Atra sarga visargascha sthanam. Sthanam is the planetary system. Fifth canto of Srimad Bhagavatam especially describes in detail how this whole universe is actually established, how these different planetary systems, the 14 planetary systems, how they are in relation to Bhumandala, so on and so forth we see. Sthanam, Poshanam. Poshanam is protection or the maintenance aspect of the Lord. So we see throughout Srimad Bhagavatam that aspect is described. Some pastimes you will see it more explicit, but even if we look around in this room, how are we living? By breathing. Supreme Lord is maintaining us. He is giving us everything. The land that we actually live on, the air that we breathe, everything. Okay, heat, light, food, everything Supreme Lord gives us. So, Sthanam, Poshanam, Yutayaha. Yutayaha is creative impetus. Especially Bharatavarsha, it's mentioned it's Karma Bhumi. Anyone who is born in this land of Bharatavarsha, they are endowed with this wonderful potency of, Prabhupada says, of making one's own destiny. In other places, it's called Bhusvarga. Even in Bhumandala, if you actually see, people are there, but then they are enjoying the results of their past pious activities. It's mentioned when the Devatas, when they run out of their tenure or run out of their punya, Shine punya martya lokam vishanti, when they fall down, they don't fall directly to Bhuloka, where we live in. Rather, in the Bhumandala, they are living in other dvipas or other varshas, where the facility to enjoy heavenly opulences is still there to a greater extent, and they worship the Supreme Lord there also. So Prabhupada explains that now because that is also a result of their past punya, they really don't shape up their future, so to speak. Somebody may still perform a sinful activity and then they are still going to be stuck. You will come across in Puranic stories, they go to Sumeru, Mandara mountain in one pleasure-giving forest on the banks of some beautiful river. They were sporting with some damsels and suddenly they get cursed. From one extreme they go to the other. Manigriva Nalakuvera, you will see, classical example, like that. Whereas Bharatavarsha, Prabhupada says, because here there is a good mix of pleasure and pain, wherein one can keep on working to shape up one's future. So, work, karma is very much part of everyone who is actually born in this, part of everyone's life. Whoever who is actually born in this Bharatavarsha. Even if you take Bhakti Yoga also, Prabhupada says, we are still doing work. Prabhupada says, just like karmis, they work hard, we shall work very, very hard. Prabhupada is saying. Sometimes we say in terms of, we need to maintain balance between sadhana, seva. True. But sadhana should be something that should be very much inherent part of our lifestyle. Just like we breathe the air. Do we really make any effort to breathe the air? We don't. Okay, breathing is happening even when you are asleep. Okay, it's going in autopilot mode. That script is keep on running in loop. Similarly, our sadhana should be like that. We wake up early in the morning, we do our sadhana. It should be part of our lifestyle. If we are alive in a day and it's morning 10 a.m., what it should also mean is we should have finished our chanting, hopefully our reading also. If not reading, at least our chanting we should have finished. So sadhana should be part of our lifestyle. It should be part of our value system, inherent value system, so to speak. So the effort we actually put in should be towards serving to bring pleasure to their lordships, Shri Radha Gopinath. So every activity that we do, Prabhupada says we need to understand that it is helping us to take one step closer to Krishna. So we being born in this karma bhumi, yutayaha, how to do that work, that is actually given in Srimad Bhagavatam. You will see. Krishna himself actually gives example of many people. If you see 3rd chapter of Bhagavad Gita, Krishna gives astita janakadayaha. He says, just like many people that are working in this world, great devotees like even Janaka, they have also attained perfection. He says, how? Lokanam api, loka sangraham evapi, he says. Simply to establish the standard of how to actually lead a life, even great devotees like Janaka, they also did that work. So Krishna was, or rather Krishna is eternally urging all of us to work. Paschan kartum arhasi. Considering this, we also should work. Krishna says that. So work is so much part of our life. Work is our expression of our love for Krishna. Otherwise, we can't sit and tell to Krishna, Krishna, I love you. Devamrita Maharaj gives this beautiful example. If a husband loves his wife, or even if two people are in a relationship, if one person loves the other person, how much pleasure can one give to the other simply by saying, I love you? How long can the person be saying? The other person at some point of time would push back and say, well, express it, prove it. How do you prove? By doing some work. So then Maharaj was saying, so then you have to go out, earn some money, build a house, or if you are in a home, you have to go cook something to serve the other person. So in other words, service is the only way how we can express our love. Service is the only way how we can prove our love. And service means it is karma. Karma that is actually done for the pleasure of the Supreme Lord. Even though externally it looks like exactly the same activity as a karmi would do, as a devotee, the purpose is completely different. Why a devotee does an action and why a karmi does an action. Prabhupada says there is a gulf of difference between the two. Or rather, they are diametrically opposite. One is done specifically only for sense gratification, whereas the devotee is actually doing simply for pleasure of the Supreme Lord. Just like Prabhupada gives this example when lion catches its prey between its teeth, this is death for that prey, Prabhupada says. Whereas the same lion, when it carries the cub, that is an expression of love. Action may actually look the same, but one is death and the other is the highest expression of love. So same way the activity which a karmi and a devotee do, they look exactly the same, but the purpose, result is completely different. One is entangling, whereas the other one is liberating. Okay. Sthanam poshanam yutayaha. So that impetus, that push to actually do the work, Prabhupada says that we can actually study in Srimad Bhagavatam. Sthanam poshanam yutayaha. Manvantara, the change of manus, we were discussing before also, how there are 14 manus in a day of Lord Brahma. And every time a Manu changes, the whole ministry cabinet, everything changes. Saptarishis change, Indra change, everyone. Okay. Manvantara, Ishanukata, Krishna Kata, pastimes of the Lord. Nirodha. Nirodha means winding up. When the Supreme Lord Mahavishnu, Yaseika Nishvashita Kala Matavalambya, when he breathes out, unlimited universes come out of his bodily pores. But then when he breathes in, everything gets wound up and goes into that cosmic annihilation. That is Nirodha. That winding up of this material creation into the body of Mahavishnu. Everything going in. My Guru Maharaj says in one lecture that Advaita Acharya, he is Mahavishnu himself. Just like how a baby will come from a mother's womb and becomes the object of love of the mother. Similarly, we all come from the body of Mahavishnu. We all come from the body of Advaita Acharya. So, my Guru Maharaj was actually saying that Mahavishnu has that motherly love with all living entities, not just humans. All living entities in all universes. So Advaita Acharya, that's why he is very, very merciful. He never take any offenses. Even when we sing, Daya Karo Sitapati, Advaita Gosai, Tava Kripa, Balepai, Chaitanya Nitai. By your mercy, oh my dear Lord, Advaita Acharya can one get the mercy of Lord Chaitanya and Lord Nityananda Prabhu. So that is Nirodha. Nirodha is cosmic annihilation. To be more specific, the entire creation along with the living entities getting wound up and then going into the body of Mahavishnu. That's Nirodha. Mukti. Mukti is the most, or rather more permanent or ultimate destination. Muktir hitva yata rupam swarupena vyavasthiti. That's the definition that's given. When the living entity is swarupena vyavasthiti, when the living entity from its conditioned nature goes back to the spiritual world and gets established in its eternal constitutional position of being servant of Krishna. Prabhupada says, everyone in this creation is a servant of Krishna. That's like the common thread that connects everyone. And Prabhupada is saying, who is the first created a being? Or who is the first personality that came out of Krishna? Balaram. Even though Balaram is brother of Krishna, still mode of Balaram is servant of Krishna only. You take some Srimati Radharani, servant of Krishna only. You take, Prabhupada is saying, Mother Yashoda, she is mother. In some pastime she chases baby Krishna with the stick, tying him with the ropes. Still, her mood is that of servant only. So Prabhupada says, everyone and everything in this world is meant for only one purpose, to serve Krishna. So, be it Balaram, be it Srimati Radharani, be it Mother Yashoda, what to speak of, tiny little jivas like us. So, there's only one purpose for all the creation, that is Swarupena Vyavasthiti, to be connected in that eternal constitutional position with Krishna, so that we can become the object of pleasure for Krishna. That's Mukti. Nirodha Muktir Ashrayaha. Shukadeva Goswami mentions about all these 9 topics to glorify on this 10th most important topic. In other words, all the other 9 topics are actually narrated in Srimad Bhagavatam simply to emphasize on this particular topic, which is Ashraya, which is, Prabhupada translate that as Sammam Bonam. Ashraya means ultimate shelter, which is the lotus feet of the Supreme Lord. The lotus feet of Shri Radha Gopinath. That is our ultimate shelter. So, these 10 topics are actually mentioned first in the first verse of this chapter, chapter 10, second canto, and then the definition, as we briefly described, the definition of each one of the topics are given. And then the creation that's actually started to be explained in these verses, you see. Now, there is one difference. Somebody was asking me this question last week about, is it the same Virat Rupa that we actually see in 11th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, Vishwa Rupa Darshana Yoga? There is one primary difference between that Vishwarupa which Krishna shows in Bhagavad Gita and that which is described in Srimad Bhagavatam. The one which Krishna describes in Bhagavad Gita, that's a vision he is actually giving to Arjuna. He is telling to Arjuna, this is how this whole world is operating. This is how I am the shelter of everything that you actually see, both material and spiritual in this world. And that Krishna is actually demonstrating to Arjuna as a vision. It was real, but Krishna showed it for some time to Arjuna. So that is Virat Rupa we see. We also see Vishwarupa we see. We also see Kala Rupa also. The gory form of that, wherein we actually see all the soldiers in the Kaurava side, they get sucked in, and we read all this graphical description. Some people, they got crushed between the teeth, it's given. And Arjuna could actually see everyone gushing in, just like he uses analogy. A moth would actually rush towards the fire, like that it's given. So that description is given that about Kala Rupa, or the form, eternal form of time. So that's the form that Krishna demonstrates there. So that's a vision which he actually gives. Whereas what we see in Srimad Bhagavatam as Virat Rupa in this section, this is not really a vision, but this is a conceptualization for somebody who is just getting into the first step of self-realization, who don't even know who Krishna is, who don't know anything about it, who don't know anything about anything spiritual. All they can visualize is whatever that they actually see. You will come across, even in any part of the world you go, tribal people, they always worship, fire. You will come across, they worship mountain, sun, anything which is more tangible for them, but anything which is enormous also for them, something which is little incomprehensible for them, something which is more awe-inspiring. They started to worship. Everywhere you will see worship. Many places you will see people even worship snakes, and they may have no idea about Nagaloka, they don't know what Sarpa is, they don't know anything, they don't know Vasuki, nothing. Nevertheless, they still worship because it's like a way of submission. In Puranic stories, you will come across even sometimes demons are worshipped. Not out of love, because out of fear, So that at least they may be favorably disposed. So the whole idea of actually worshipping snakes in many places, even without any scriptural injunction or shastric knowledge, was simply to ward off that fear. Yes, I'm in the good books of snakes, so that it may not bite me. So intuitively, there is that feeling which everyone has to surrender to something which is big, something which is huge. So that is given as the first step to start to sit and meditate, to recognize that there is something greater than me. Then I'm not the Ishvara here, but there is something more powerful than me. That's the first step, to accept. Fear of God is the beginning of wisdom, they said. Okay, so
at least to have that sort of a fear. Okay, some places they say fear of God is the beginning of religion also. Some people quote like that. Okay, so to accept that there is something greater than me, that is the first step to go towards God. So in that conceptualization, one actually sits there and then meditates on these different aspects of creation, wherein it's mentioned how the whole idea here is whatever that the Supreme Lord sanctions, it can actually happen in this world. Prabhupada says even a blade of grass cannot actually move. There's one story actually in Puranas that describe that. When Prabhupada actually quotes that, not even a blade of grass moves without a sanction of the Lord. So one day Vishnu actually puts one blade of grass and he asks each of the demigods to move. First Varuna comes, tries to do, no, nothing happens. Each one, Chandra, Vayu also comes, tries to blow. Nothing happens. Then when Indra comes to know, Indra thinks, what? Just a tiny blade of grass, nobody can move, I will go and do. So he boarded on Airavat, coming with this Vajra, and on the way Mother Parvati stops him. Because she has compassion to Indra as her son. And she tells to Indra, you better about turn, go back, you will never be able to do. So that story actually explains how not even a blade of grass can actually move without the sanction of the Lord. Now, for somebody without any scriptural knowledge to understand that is very hard. So the conceptualization that's given here is, there is this huge personality whose bodily hairs are the trees. Okay, the sun and the moon are his eyes. So that whole description, conceptualization that's given. So a sage, when they actually sit in meditation, even before they actually see the Supreme Lord, even before they even have any knowledge about the Supreme Lord, they need to start somewhere. So they sit and they start to meditate on each of these different aspects. But the underlying principle in this Virat Rupa description is, unless the Supreme Lord desires to do something, we cannot do it. That's the whole point here. Okay, so you will see the description that's given. The first sense, interestingly, that's given is, in today's verse, if you see, from the mouth, the palate became manifested. In the previous verses, we saw that the same Supreme Lord, but then when for the process of creation, he divides into three different potencies that's actually given. Adi Bhuta, Adi Atma, and Adi Daiva. Okay, Adi Bhuta is the material body. Adi Daiva is the controlled deity, or controlling deity rather. And Adi Atma, that is the controlled entity. So these three aspects that are actually given, Srila Prabhupada explains in this purport, Adi Atma, Adi Deva, and Adi Bhuta. Adi Atma is the controlled entity. Adi Deva, it's the controlling deity. And Adi Bhutam, that is the material body, Srila Prabhupada actually explains. So in this example that is actually given, we can actually understand the tongue that we actually see, that's the material manifestation. So if you put this analysis into practice, Adi Atma, Adi Deva, and Adi Bhuta. Tongue is Adi Bhuta. Adi Deva, the controlling deity of the tongue, is Varuna, because in order to taste anything, there has to be wetness. Okay, have you read this famous book called Salted Bread? Okay, devotees, they went through so much difficulties, I think in Armenia. So when the mouth is dry, you can't really taste. The very tasting potency that we have in our tongue is due to the wetness in there. You can't taste something which is totally dry. When your mouth is totally dry, try tasting a little atta and put it in your mouth. You can't. You will only choke up. You can't even digest it. Okay? So for anything to be tasted, you need wetness in it. You need water. And that rasa, that juice, that water, controlling deity is Varuna. So that's how we understand. So the Adi Bhuta aspect is the tongue, which we actually see. And Adi Daiva is Varuna. Now, Adi Atma. Now there is a gross sense that we see as tongue. But there is something called as palate. Palate is like the taste, the sense of that. Do you understand? That's the subtle sense of the tongue. So tongue actually has got two aspects. One is the gross aspect that we actually see. Physically, you can even touch, you can see. Okay, so that's the tongue. But then there is the tasting potency of the tongue, just like the eyes. Blind people may have the physical aspect of the eye, but not the subtle aspect of the eye. Without that subtle aspect, they can't see. Do you understand? Sometimes you will come across people who are blind, they still have the eyes, but they can't see. So with that, you can actually analyze. Same, people who are deaf, if you actually see people who can't actually hear, then they have the ears, but they can't really hear it. Do you understand? Likewise, eyes also, sometimes even smell also. People, they have the nose, but the potency, the subtle sense organ. So every sense has a gross aspect and a subtle aspect. The gross aspect is called Adi Bhuta. The subtle aspect is called Adi Atma. Okay, so for the tongue, what we see physically, that is Adi Bhuta. And the power to taste or the potency to taste that is Adi Atma. Okay. Now the relationship that's actually given between Virat Rupa and each of these subtle senses is, unless the Supreme Lord does anything, we cannot actually do independent of him. That's the whole point here of description of Virat Rupa. So if you visualize the Supreme Lord, you will see, like for example, you will come across, even Prabhupada actually explains beautifully, like if you see Bharat Maharaj's pastime, he ruled the earth for millions of years. But then you will also come across, he's in a pure devotional platform. Okay, it's mentioned he was in Bhava stage. So he's a pure devotee. Nevertheless, you will see they still encouraged the Brahmanas in their country to do Vedic sacrifices. Most of the Vedic sacrifices, if you actually see, they'll be aimed towards different demigods. And Prabhupada actually says, specifically to this instance, as part of the sacrifice, when Brahmanas do Indraya Swahaha Idam Krishna Idam Namama, okay, Agneye Swahaha Idam Krishna Idam Namama, when they say Indraya Swaha, Bharat Maharaj will sit in meditation. Bharat Maharaj will see Indra in relationship to the Supreme Lord. It's mentioned in Srimad Bhagavatam, the Deva Devatas, they are Narayana Angada. Angada means limbs, Anga. They are the different limbs of Narayana. So when they say Indraya Swahaha, Bharat Maharaj will remember the lotus hands of Radha Gopinath. Then he says Agnaye Swahaha, Agni is like the eyes, the sun. So then he'll remember the lotus petal eyes. Like that it's mentioned. Externally, he still encourages for the welfare of the people, and there are people who are in that Varnashrama Dharma, they are not in pure devotional service yet, they still have to be encouraged. Krishna himself says, one should not disturb somebody on their own path. So, as a dutiful king, he is encouraging them, but he is very, very clear. Okay? Similar example, we were just discussing. Janaka Maharaj, Rajam Prabhu says, Supreme Lord has got father, mother, father-in-law also. Supreme Lord's father-in-law is Janaka Maharaj, Sita Devi's mother, Sita's father. So in many instances you will actually see, actually there are some pastimes that are actually given about Janaka Maharaj. One day Ashtavakara Muni, he comes to his assembly. So then Janaka Maharaj welcomes him, does Pada Puja, everything, and then he asks him this question. Oh my dear sage, how can our citizens, including myself, how can all of us become free from Maya? Then Ashtavakara Muni immediately jumps out of his Vyasasan, runs outside to palace, everyone run. And then he goes outside the palace and he goes, hugs a tree tight. And then he looks at the king. So then Janaka Maharaj looks at him, my lord, what is the answer? And then Ashtavakara Muni, after hugging, he says, this is the answer. And he says, everyone is saying, Maya is catching hold of them. Maya is not catching hold of them. They are the ones who is going and catching hold of Maya. Very graphically he explains. Like that you will see. Other instance you will see how Janaka Maharaj, even though he is in a very, very elevated stage, he still does his duty, as Krishna is actually explaining here. Another instance we come across is when he was actually going to the spiritual world. He goes past the Yamaloka, and there all the other jivas that were there, they were going through, hellish conditions. But as soon as Janaka Maharaj just comes there, one of the 12 Mahajans, Prahlada, Janaka, Bhishma, when he comes there, all the living entities, they get relieved of all the pain. And then they plead him, please don't leave us. We know that pastime. And Janaka Maharaj actually assures them that he won't leave. Then Yamaraj actually comes with the solution. He tells Janaka Maharaj, you just give on your early morning chanting, very important. Prabhupada actually says that when we wake up early in the morning, Brahma Muhurta time, Prabhupada says, by nature's arrangement, even a cock crows, no alarm clock needed. Prabhupada writes in Krishna book, the cock will crow exactly at Brahma Muhurta time. Ko, 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 ko. So Prabhupada says, this is Krishna's supreme arrangement. So Brahma Muhurta, it will wake up and it will make the noise, so everyone will get like a snooze clock. They have this imitation clock that also does that. But that's the original arrangement, Prabhupada says. So in Brahma Muhurta time, everyone wakes up and then everyone does the services. So one day Janaka Maharaj goes to Yamaloka, and Yamaraj actually tells him that if you just give the benefit, spiritual benefit which you accrued by chanting one name of Lord Ram on any of the mornings in your life, just give that little credit. With that, I can liberate everyone. Janaka Maharaj immediately gives him. So temporarily, even Yamaloka became empty. Everyone got liberated simply because of chanting. So every day morning when we wake up and chant, remember this pastime. That's how powerful chanting early in the morning in front of Tulsi Maharani. If we are in home, we can still be in the temple by logging into Mayapur TV. Sit in front of your altar and you can sit and chant very nicely. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Rama, Hare Hare. So the duty that is actually performed by Janaka Maharaj, one day he comes to the class a little late, class keeps on going. Suddenly he hears the news that there is some fire outbreak somewhere. Even some of the Brahmanas, it's mentioned, they drop everything and they run. And when people asked, why are you running? Oh, maybe even our house might have caught the fire. They keep running. But Janaka Maharaj happily sits and hears, even though he's the king. And then Janaka Maharaj calls his commander-in-chief and he says, go and do the needful. And he continues. And the one who is giving Krishna Katha, he asks him, my lord, don't you need to go to take care of your praja? He says, that fire I already sent a commander-in-chief. But Bhagavatam is very important, because this is going to dose of samsara, dava, nalalita, loka. This fire is even more distressing. Continue like that, he says. So, Janaka Maharaj, in a very exemplary way, he maintained the balance, wherein loka sangraham hevapi, simply to lead people by example, he still did his duty. Nevertheless, at the same time, his heart, mind, everything is at the lotus feet of Krishna. He had nothing to do for himself. In fact, when Krishna uses this example of Janaka Maharaj, that's what he says. So when we are born in this world, in connection with the Lord, unless the Supreme Lord desires us to do something, we can't do it. Like Virat Rupa we actually see. We also need to understand, simply for every action which the Supreme Lord desires, in this case, just to close the loop, the sequence that's actually given in this verse is, when the yogis sit in meditation and they actually see Virat Rupa in their meditation, if the Virat Rupa of the Lord, he desires to eat, he desires to taste something, that is the time, unless he desires, these subtle and gross sense organs will not actually manifest. So that's the point he is actually teaching here. Shukadeva Goswami. So the yogis sit in meditation and they meditate on the Virat Rupa, and when they realize, yes, Virat Rupa is developing this desire to eat, desire to taste something, at that time, every other jiva in this world, they develop from that desire. Firstly, the gross sense is developed, which is just the tongue. Then the second step from that is the subtle sense that's actually manifested. First is Adibhuta, which is the physical aspect. Then the subtle aspect. Subtle aspect is the palate or the potency or the power to taste, which is Adi Atma, first Adi Bhuta, then Adi Atma, and then Adi Deva comes. And then comes Tanmatra. Tanmatra is the sense object. Then all the different, tasty objects actually get created. So this is the sequence. First is the desire of the Lord in the Virat Rupa form, then the manifestation of gross sense, and then the manifestation, which is Adi Bhuta, manifestation of subtle sense, which is the Adi Atma. In this case, it's the tongue, which is the Adi Bhuta first, and then the palate, which is the potency to taste. That's the second aspect, which is Adi Atma, and then Adi Deva, which is the Supreme Lord Varuna. And then comes Tanmatra, the different sense objects that's given. Now, this order, if you remember, it's easy. Next, almost, this is what, 17, almost till next dozen verses touches on the same thing. Then the Supreme Lord will desire to see. Likewise, eyes will manifest. Likewise, it's given. But this is the order. First, Virat Rupa, he develops the desire to actually do an activity. Then gross sense, subtle sense, the presiding deity of that particular sense, and then the corresponding sense object. They get created this way. So this is how the whole creation came to be. So this is how this description is actually given here. So it's important to see, Prabhupada says in Vedic times, if somebody have any problem with let's say their nervous system, that nervous system is actually like the veins actually. They are also like the rivers in this whole Virat Rupa. So Prabhupada says there is this understanding of the presiding deity. It's actually very important because Prabhupada says this is how Ayurveda works. If somebody has problem with their nervous system, in the Virat Rupa, that whole nervous system is river. Prabhupada is saying, according to Ayurveda, one is supposed to go and keep on taking dip in flowing rivers. You understand? So that connection is there between Virat Rupa, the presiding deity, as well as our own ecosystem. Okay, internal ecosystem, so to speak. Okay, so that's why you will see in many places, as I said, Narayana, Angada. So the different demigods, they are to be given respect. We have to be very, very careful. Prabhupada in many places, he actually explains, especially even in Chaitanya Charitamrita, you will come across. We don't worship the demigods directly, independent of the Supreme Lord. But that doesn't mean we disrespect them. Okay, Indra is a very elevated person. Whenever Indra does Swaha, yesterday we did Yagya. Did you see Vishnu coming out of the fire? Whenever Indra does, Vishnu comes himself. So he's a very, very elevated personality, actually. So each of the different demigods, so whenever, like even if you read Krishna book, Krishna, it's mentioned, Krishna wakes up 3 hours before sunrise. You know, there is a chapter that says activities of Lord Krishna. He wakes up 3 hours before the sunrise. And then he sits in meditation. He is meditating on himself. And Prabhupada is saying, and then during the daytime, he will also go to a temple of some demigod like Shiva, it's mentioned. You will see Rukmini Mata. She goes to Durga Devi temple. You will come across Katyayani, okay, Gopis worship. So you will different, or Ambika, for example, Nanda Baba, they go with the family. So different pastimes you will see. Supreme Lord doesn't come, when he comes, he doesn't disturb the established order of this world, the administrative system. But when somebody loses their connection about their boss, which is with the Supreme Lord himself, like Indra, lifting Govardhan hill pastime happens. Then in those instances you will see Krishna will come and bring demigod to proper sense, to actually make them understand that, you know, there is nothing that you are capable of doing. It's because of my desire you are doing. So even in this you can say, from Virat Rupa only, each of the presiding deities, they are actually coming and they are given their own respective tasks. So when we actually do anything, that understanding is actually needed. To consider the names of demigods like Lord Shiva or Lord Brahma to be independent, or to consider demigods independent of the names of Lord Vishnu, that is one of the offense. But it doesn't say to consider them at all is offense. No, we have to understand Shiva is a topmost Vaishnava. So when we worship Shiva in relationship with the Supreme Lord, that pleases the Supreme Lord. It pleases Shiva also. You will see Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, when he goes to South India, he visits the temple of Lord Shiva. Krishna himself visits temple of Lord Shiva. You can read Krishna book, you will see. It's there in 10th canto. Okay, so we have to understand. It's time up. I'll just finish with one point. So it's interesting that the first sense that's actually described in Virat Rupa is tongue, because in 11th canto it's actually given Jitam Sarvam Jite Rase. There are 2 verses I think we discussed this before, I'm not sure. So it's mentioned there that Indriyani Jayantyahu Nirahara Manishinaha, which means Indriyani Jayantyashu, it's very easy to conquer any of the sense. How? Nirahara Manishinaha, simply by fasting. Nirahara Manishanaha. So, if somebody wants to conquer any of the sense, all they have to do is fast from it. However, if somebody wants to fast, if somebody thinks, I can do the same approach when it comes to controlling the tongue, tan niranyasya vardate, it wants. It says, if somebody says, I will control the tongue simply by fasting, Bhagavatam says, in 11th canto the verse is there, this process of fasting and controlling the sense will work for every other sense except the tongue. Why? If we don't actually eat something, then okay, tongue will be controlled for some time. But as soon as fasting finishes, what happens? We tend to compensate, correct? We tend to eat more. So where is the control now? Only during the time when the fasting is done, at that time only tongue is controlled. But as soon as the time of fasting finishes, immediately the tongue is going and taking more voraciously. We all have that experience. But it says, Bhagavatam also says that unless somebody controls the tongue, one cannot be claimed or one cannot be actually said to have controlled all their senses. If somebody controlled their tongue, it means they have controlled all the senses. That's why Jitam Sarvam Jite Rase. If somebody had controlled the tongue, Jitam Sarvam, which means they have controlled all the senses. Jite Rase. Rase means tongue. If somebody controls the tongue, it means they have controlled all the senses. So Prabhupada actually quotes from Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur. The tongue is actually enjoying 12 different types of tastes according to Ayurveda. But Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur says that 12 different types of tastes can be controlled by roaming on the 12 forests of Vrindavan and taking the dust of Vrindavan and smearing on one's body. Unless one does that, one cannot control the tongue. So how can one control all the senses? By controlling the tongue. But how can one control the tongue? Not just by fasting. Fasting can only work until the duration of fast. You can't fast permanently. Do you understand? You will die. So Prabhupada says that is not a feasible approach. The only way to control the tongue is by doing 2 things. Chanting the holy name of the Lord, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So by chanting the holy name and by eating Krishna Prasad. Prabhupada actually quotes Sarira Vidyajal prayers in that purport if you actually see. Okay, so that's how the tongue is controlled. So it's interesting, in the creation of each of these, tongue is actually mentioned first. I was just remembering. Because unless tongue is controlled, unless one controls the tongue, one cannot be called as Goswami. One hasn't controlled any other sense. But if one has controlled the tongue, Jitam Sarvam Jite Rase, then one is said to have controlled all the other senses. Any questions or comments?
Well, thank you for the class. I had 3 questions, and I think we answered it in an indirect way that actually helped me understand the answer to the question. So, like, you mentioned gross and subtle. In our Earth planet, we have gross and subtle as we see it. But in other planets, there may not be gross element present. Like, for example, Brahma. In Brahma, everyone's body kind of intelligence and slowly subtle.
Yep.
So, for example, the activities they engage in those other planets are also subtle.
Yep.
For example, eating will be subtle, not gross.
Absolutely.
So all these planets have subtle elements or gross elements? Or there are planets, other planets also with...
There are other planets with gross also. Like if you take Indraloka, they drink Somapana, it's given. So that's like a normal drink only. But not to be confused with the liquor. It's a different type of beverage. Intoxicant, but it's a beverage. Like you will see Manigriva and Nalakuvera, they are intoxicated. Not to be confused with the alcohol that people drink in this world. That type of beverage is completely different. And you will see in Mausala Leela, when all the Dwarkavasis, when they actually go to Prabhasha Kshetra, you will see they also drank a beverage that's made of rice, a barley. You sometimes think, how can that be intoxicating? It's just like, a grain like that. So it's a different type. It depends on what planetary system somebody is in. Higher they go, more subtler it gets, obviously. Yeah.
So the question is, like, for example, in Bhagavatam we get there is Vyakya going there's offerings, and like Lord Brahma or people with Sabbath body are offered the gross elements, and how are they accepting the offerings?
Good question. Chaitanya Charan Prabhu, he gives this beautiful example, analogy. If you go to Western Union or MoneyGram or something, right? So you pay the money in Australian currency here, and let's say you are sending money to India. So you pay in gross currency, or rather in Australian dollars here. Somebody in India, for the same amount, using the same system, will be able to draw in rupees. So same way he says, from our side, we are offering something which is gross. That's the best we can do. If somebody says, offer your feelings in the kunda, what can we offer? We can't even control it. So our level is very, very weak. So the level of our yajna is actually, so we are actually doing in a level that is we are capable of, basically. So we are offering ghee, we are offering grain, during the ahuti, offering, fruits, you will see, the vastra, everything we offer. So the system of yajna is such that you imagine the yajna system is like the Western Union. And you are paying in Australian currency here. They will actually derive it in a currency which is applicable for them. Okay, so that's the whole system of yajna. Now how exactly, what they derive, they don't take the exact thing that you actually offer, but they take the equivalent of that in a form that is palatable for them. Each level, like that.
And just another quick point that you mentioned about the song written by the last October, Advaita Acharya. In that song, is there any particular reason why we don't glorify or you have mentioned Ganada?
Good question. There are songs that actually glorifies Panchatattva separately. There are songs that glorify only two personalities of Panchatattva. Parama Karuna Bahudu Yajana Nitai Gaurachandra. There are songs that glorify only Gauranga. There are songs that glorify only Nityananda Prabhu. Gaura Gadai is a very confidential aspect, actually, of worship. So Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur was worshipping Gaur Gadadhar. But Prabhupada, when he actually came and gave, Prabhupada established Panchatattva for us. So usually we don't hear much about Gadadhar Pandit's mood, Gadadhar Pandit's relationship with Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. As much as you don't see very openly relationship between Radha and Krishna that easily. It's like that. It's most confidential, so you don't see it. You won't see it glorified that often. But there are songs that mentions about Gadadhar also.
Because we see in this chapter, we see the gross sense is manifested by the Lord, and you have to do for this year. But when we see all gross senses are manifested by parents, we take that as the world. So how can we understand the Supreme Lord is manifesting the gross senses according to this chapter?
Good question. Something which I didn't mention here is, before he even starts this creation, what is the first principle he creates?